So welcome everyone to our October 2022 installment of webinars for busy lawyers. Today we are in ADHD Awareness Month, and we have the one and only Dr. Sean Healy on tips to start improving your attention in the legal profession. I'm Rachel, filling in for our usual host, Laura, who had a scheduling conflict today. These monthly webinars on mindset, marketing, and tech are brought to you by Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers Massachusetts, where we are privileged to provide free and confidential services to the Massachusetts legal profession in the areas of mental health, well-being, and practice management. Webinars for busy lawyers are designed to give you practical takeaways that you can apply in your life as a lawyer, all in 30 minutes or less, with extra time for live Q&A. Feel free to chat in questions throughout the presentation, which we'll hold till the end and ask Sean then. Hopefully the chat feature is working. If not, do your best to communicate that with us. It looks like it is. If there are any troubles, I'll provide an email address you can communicate with. So today I have the honor of introducing my coworker, LCLMA staff clinician, Sean Healy. If you don't know him yet, you've been missing out, but you can catch previous webinars he's presented before on both sleep and burnout. We have those on demand, and Massachusetts legal professionals can schedule a free consultation with Sean, all at our website, lclma.org. Sean joined LCL back in 2014 following his work in a private group practice in Cambridge. Prior to private practice, Sean worked at May Institute for 10 years as a clinical director, and finally the director of clinical services and operations for the behavioral health division of May Institute. Sean is licensed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a psychologist. Sean co-authored a 2017 ABA book, The Full Weight of the Law: How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression, with fellow LCLMA staff clinician Jeff Fortgang. Sean serves on the Massachusetts SJC Standing Advisory Committee on Professionalism, as well as on the Massachusetts Bar Association's Lawyer Wellbeing Committee. Sean runs our ADHD support group, which has been around for years and years and now meets weekly online. You can find more on our website, and I'll drop a direct link in the chat shortly to that group, our scheduling page, and Sean's previous webinars. I think that is enough from me. Sean, take it away.
Well, thank you, Rachel. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Rachel mentioned, October is ADHD Awareness Month, and so I'm here to talk to you a little bit about attention. Whether you have ADHD or not, there's some helpful things that you can do to improve your attention. What I should say at the start is, don't do everything that I'm going to go over. I try to pack in a lot of stuff, a lot of suggestions. If you try to do everything, that will easily become overwhelming and you'll not do anything. So if anything sticks out to you as something that might be helpful, just make a note, try it out. If it is successful, keep doing it. If not, try something else. So just to do a little clarification, a lot of us as adults, because we've been around for a while, have gone through history that included some changes in how we understand ADHD. So decades ago, oftentimes the perception was that ADHD, or attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, meant that you didn't have an attention span, which is not true. So ADHD does not mean that you lack attention. Those who have ADHD often have both under focus in certain areas and over focus in others. The part where it becomes an issue is when you're under focusing on something that is important or that you want to focus on or need to, and perhaps over focusing on something that you don't want to spend as much time focusing on. And the opposite can be true too. You can actually over focus on something that is important to focus on and really benefit from that. We call that hyper focusing. And then when you're not focusing on something that's trivial, again, that's a benefit as well. So you have both of those aspects with ADHD. It's helpful to think about your attention in 4 separate areas. So you might experience challenges with your attention in one or multiple areas here. So one is starting a task. So paying attention to something that you're going to start up, sustaining your attention. So I've started the task. Now I want to focus and maintain my attention until the task is done. Sometimes sticking with it is challenging. Sometimes stopping a task is challenging. So again, that over focus is, I want to keep doing this even though my time has run out, or I have another competing demand, or it's hard for me to sort of pause because I'm in the zone and I don't want to lose my momentum. And the fourth is shifting your attention. So related to stopping, it's sometimes hard to take my attention that's focused on one area and then move it to another. So if you're aware that you may or may not have challenges in one or more of those areas, it's helpful just to be aware of that. Then there's different things you can do to help yourself with your attention in those four areas. I'm going to go fast, so I apologize for packing so much into this. So one thing to consider, one area to start with, is to assess your internal environment. All right, so for example, using mindfulness to do a little check-in, right? So very briefly, mindfulness is all about being aware of your present moment. So directing your attention to how you are experiencing your reality at this particular time. So focusing in your senses, like what can you see, what can you hear, what can you taste, touch, so forth and so on. So drawing your attention to your internal environment means asking yourself, how are you feeling emotionally? Am I encouraged? Am I anxious? Right? How am I feeling physically? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Right? Do I feel pain or discomfort in my body, or comfort in my body? Right? Do I need something? Do I need to take a bathroom break? Do I need to stretch? Do I feel some tension, internally? Drawing your attention to your internal environment, one gives you those cues about what's going on and what I need, and then that can be directly linked to something you can do about them. When you don't have that awareness of your internal environment, you're often affected by it, sort of like in the background, and you're not aware. So for example, if I'm trying to pay attention to something, but I'm hungry, it's really hard to pay attention to something when there's something else, some other need that is like really sort of grabbing my attention in the background, right? Or if I'm like physically uncomfortable, right? If I'm cold, but I'm trying to focus, but I'm shivering, that's going to impact my ability to focus. Also, in addition to your physical experience, where is your thoughts, right? Your mental experience, your cognitive experience, right? So am I focusing on things that are more interesting? Am I trying to do something that I find boring, but my thoughts are somewhere else, right? Am I thinking about what's next? Am I anxious about the future? Am I thinking about my to-do list, right? And at times, like, do I feel an urge to say something? So I feel this internal sense of like, I've got to get it out, right? And that's really taking my focus. So the more that you're aware of your internal environment, you can, again, just be aware of it, and two, figure out ways where you have control to meet some needs, to therefore turn down some of the distractions internally that will then help you focus your attention on what you need to. And then turning your attention to the external environment, assess that as well, right? So looking at where you work in the physical environment that you're in, right? Is your environment optimal for focusing? So for example, like, do I have in the physical environment that I work best in? Do I have visual distractions? Do I have auditory distractions? Right. Again, the temperature. Like, do I feel that this is the optimal temperature? So you can't always control all of those things. If you can control all of those things, great, please do. But oftentimes you're in a situation where it's not ideal. So if there are things that are not ideal, first is just being aware of them. And the second is figuring out, what do I have control? Can I reduce a distraction? Right? Can I accept some and reduce others? Where are there distractions? Right? Are there opportunities to minimize them. One example that I often discuss is, so if the sound level isn't optimal, right? Like outside, there's traffic, there's street cleaners, there's sirens, what have you. If you can't control that level of noise and it's distracting to you, what can you do? Can you minimize it? Can you wear earphones? Can you have some ambient sound in the room that helps your brain tune out that external stuff that sort of grabs your attention? Okay. There's lots of other examples of just being aware of what your external environment is and how you can change it or tweak it slightly to help your attention stay on what you want it to stay on and not be distracted by something that's sort of in your environment that can be reduced. Also, are there guideposts that you can create or utilize? So when I say guideposts, really these are things that we either have naturally or we put into place that help our attention stay on track, right? So for example, if there are cues that I can utilize to help me focus, right? One that I have discussed a lot in the past is working remotely. I have the option of like, oh, if I'm not on camera, I can wear whatever I want, right? I can work in my PJs and my slippers, but it actually might be a helpful cue for me to put on work clothes, even if no one's going to see me, just because it's a cue to my brain that I'm in work mode, right? Which is different than hanging out mode. So sometimes we could use these guideposts to help our brains sort of get into the mode of focusing. None of these things are magic, by the way. You probably know that by experience. I can attest to that. But sometimes these little things can help over time. Another thing that's helpful is to externalize what is internally lacking. So I'll give my example in a minute, but so using tools to free up mental energy. So calendaring, using your calendar to hold things in place, as opposed to if you didn't have a calendar and you wanted to remember your appointments, what you'd have to do is you'd have to rehearse them in your brain over and over again. Go, today is Monday or Wednesday. I have this, this, and this today, right? That takes up mental energy, that takes your attention, right? Same with checklists. If I have a list of things that I need to do today, but I haven't written them down, I am forced to repeat them in my brain, right? To keep them in my active memory so I don't forget them. That's not efficient at all. That's a waste of our mental energy and also drags our attention away from the present moment to the thing that I don't want to forget. So externalizing that memory. So I take what's going around in my working memory, and I put that down on my calendar or on a checklist. So like I have replicated my memory externally. Same thing with reminders, right? If I don't want to forget something, I want to remind myself. If I'm not good at sort of having that awareness in the moment, that's what reminders are for. I'm externalizing. I'm taking that task and I'm getting it out of my head and I'm putting that task onto something else, like a reminder, a calendar, things like that. Other tools can compensate for a weakness. So not just freeing up mental space, but it's saying like, I'm lacking in this area. So I'm going to use something else to compensate for it. With ADHD, a common experience is time blindness. So it's the lack of awareness of time passing. So you can get into a task that you think is going to take you 5 minutes to do. It's going to go real quick. I have 5 minutes before I need to get out the door. So I'm going to do this task. But this task ends up taking 20 minutes. And now I'm late because I just didn't have this sense that time was passing. Right? I was surprised that it took me 20 minutes, or I was surprised that 20 minutes had gone past when I looked for the clock. So when that happens, it's helpful to externalize your sense of time using a timer. Right? My example is I'm not good at remembering people's birthdays. Like I can remember my kids, thankfully, right? My spouse, my immediate family, but like friends and other people, like no, I don't remember them. So what I do is I rely on my trusty smart device. And anytime anyone tells me their birthday, I put it into my calendar and I set the annual reminder, like boom, it's in there. There's my memory right there. So when I get the reminders, I might send a text, hey, happy birthday. And people are like, oh, wow, you remembered. I'm like, yes, I remembered, because my external brain, my smart device, compensated for that internal weakness. One of the things that we can do quite regularly is take advantage of our internal states. Right. So, for example, we are motivated in general. We're motivated by two principles. We approach something that is pleasurable, and we avoid something that is uncomfortable. So we can actually use those internal states to help us focus. All right. So your approach tendency, you are naturally drawn to things that release dopamine, right? That they're interesting to you, that they're novel. So you want to do those things, right? Those are the things that often grab your attention, whether that's a distraction or whether that's something that you hyper focus on. It's like, yes, I want to do more of this. All right. And then you have those things that that you're likely to avoid in order to reduce discomfort. So you can use both of these principles to help your attention. So for the approach tendency, if you're trying to focus your attention on something that is challenging, so this is boring, it's not novel, I'm not interested in it naturally, but I have to do it. I've got to get this done by a deadline, but I'm really having trouble focusing or starting and getting this done. What you can do is think of something that naturally gives you that approach tendency, that naturally gives you that dopamine boost that you're already interested in, and try to pair it with that thing that is difficult to focus on. Okay, in psychology circles, this is basically what we refer to as classical conditioning. We take something that you have a natural response to, and we pair it with something that you don't have that response to benefit from that natural response. So, for example, if I am naturally interested in a particular genre of music, right? Like I have a good feeling about it, it increases my mood, I like it. If I start playing that music during a time when I'm trying to do this difficult thing that I don't have natural interest in, I can benefit from that natural dopamine boost, that natural increase in my mood to help me focus on that. And the same way, you can use the opposite, the avoidance as well. If there's something that is really uncomfortable, right, that I want to avoid, how can I use that to help my attention? Well, if my task that I'm trying to focus on has a potential consequence in the future, like, oh, if I don't get this done, my client is going to complain, or I'm going to miss this filing deadline, I'm going to have some problems, right? I want to avoid that. When we bring that feeling into the present moment, that can be motivating. So sometimes the avoidance there can lead to procrastination. Like, I don't want to think about it. I want to push it off. But when we consciously choose to bring that discomfort into the present moment, like, ooh, this is what I'm trying to avoid in the future, but I want to feel it right now. Sometimes that can help focus our attention. And there's different ways of doing that, right? There's accountability, so pulling people in, so letting someone else know, I'm trying to get this thing done. It's hard for me to do it. I want you to know about it so that you can ask me about it, because it's uncomfortable for me to tell you in the future that I didn't do it. So I'm using that discomfort, that avoidance motivation to help me focus, because I've now set something up where I'm going to feel uncomfortable to tell you later that I didn't do it. So there's lots of things that you can do, but just being aware that those two general approaches or tendencies can be helpful tools. And finally, reducing the amount of decisions that you have to make can be really helpful in focusing your attention. So the reason is, when you make a decision in the moment, you have all these different competing demands and feelings, right? So, what am I going to do right now in my workday? Well, I've got a list of 10 things that I have to get done at some point. So now I have to sort through these 10 things, decide which one is the most pressing, which ones feels accomplishable, which one feels, the most uncomfortable. And I have to decide in the moment and go through all of that. When you reduce the amount of decisions you make in the moment, you can sort of sort through that easier. So the way that you do that is you decide ahead of time, right? So you make decisions outside of the moment. So therefore, when you're making the decision, you don't have those competing demands in the same way. All right. So for example, today's Wednesday. So Wednesday, Sean is going to decide what Friday Sean is going to do during his day. And I don't have these competing demands in the moment of Friday. I'm removed from it. So I can decide I'm going to do these things or put it in my calendar. This is what I'm going to do, right? And then when Friday comes, Friday Sean can decide, like, you know what? I trust Wednesday Sean. He makes good decisions. I'm just going to trust that he made the right decision for my Friday. I'm going to go with that plan, as opposed to in the moment, trying to juggle all these different competing demands. So again, that requires like a calendar, right? Using that function to plan ahead and put things in your calendar. But what it does is you basically decide to relinquish control, a little bit of control in the moment. And you decide to trust your decisions from the past, right? This is not an absolute, so you don't completely give up control of your moment. It's good to sort of give yourself some wiggle room for unexpected things that come up. But the more that you can reduce your decisions in the moment, the easier it can be. So a silly example is, if I'm deciding in the moment, what do I want to eat for lunch, right? And I've got 10 options in my kitchen. Well, then I have to decide, what do I feel like? What don't I feel like? What I want right now versus later. But if I'm deciding today what I'm going to eat next week, it's a lot easier. I'm not hungry right now. So therefore I can decide every day, boom, 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 this is what I'm going to eat. I'm going to schedule all my meals, right? Because I'm not hungry and I don't have to decide for that moment. So when that happens, we can focus our attention in a different way. Instead of trying to juggle demands, then we can be a little more focused on sort of just making a decision for the time slots that we have. And again, this is it's more about deciding one thing for another, giving up one thing for the benefit of another, right? Giving up the control in the moment for the freedom of being able to get through distractions and focus on something that's important in the moment. So I know there's a lot of stuff. That was very fast. So if people have questions about any of that or others, please, let's see, Rachel, maybe you can read some of those.
There's at least one currently outstanding question, which is right off this last point you were making about decision reduction, which is how do you account for unpredictable tasks or calls that come up while trying to work through the to-do list?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing that you can do is when you're planning your day, don't stack things back to back, right? So give yourself some buffer. This could be in between tasks or like a chunk of time to set aside for the unexpected, right? So basically you're planning for the unexpected. You don't know what's going to go in that box, but you're reserving some time for the stuff that's going to come up likely that you didn't expect. Another thing that you can do is when you're scheduling your day on your daily to-do list, having some flexibility with the time that you get things done versus if you bump it to a different day, right? So deciding these are the few things that I really need to get done today, and those things won't get bumped to another day. They can get shifted in your day, but they can't leave your day. Whereas other tasks might be a little more flexible. Or like, it would be great if I get these things done. I don't need to though. I'm not prioritizing these tasks, right? I have my 2 or 3 things that I'm really prioritizing. And then I have the stuff that would be great to get done, but I don't need to. Those smaller lists can be bumped to the next day. So it is helpful to have some sense of predictability as well as flexibility for the unexpected. And particularly if you know, like every single day, there's unexpected things, like you can predict it, then maybe having a consistent block of time just set aside for the unpredictable. If it is truly unpredictable, like some days those things don't happen and some days they do, then you might have those non-essential tasks in your calendar that you might pop out to the next day to free up time for those unexpected things that may or may not happen, if that makes sense.
Okay, great answers. So we've got another question. What works for you to get beyond procrastination in the moment?
That's good. I don't think there's one thing that is going to help one person. So speaking for myself, there's not one thing that helps me in the moment get through procrastination. So it's good to have different options, different techniques available. If you try one, doesn't work, try something else. So when I'm struggling with procrastination, sometimes if I'm in the situation where I'm trying, but I keep procrastinating, it's like, this isn't working. Sometimes just stop for a moment, like get up, move your body around, do some sort of physical activity. It doesn't have to be, at the extreme. Just get up and walk around, go outside, come back to it, right? With a fresh start. One, you're activating your brain differently when you move your body around. And two, it can be like a nice mental reset to say like, all right, I'm procrastinating. I'm not able to do this thing. I'm going to step away. Then I'm going to come back with the intention of doing it. So that can be helpful. Sometimes sort of publicizing the fact that I'm struggling with getting something done. Again, like talking to somebody you trust for accountability. Like, this is my goal. I want to get this thing done. I haven't been doing it. I want to get it done. And then letting that person know what is going to be helpful and effective for you to get it done. Not just nice, because if you like somebody, you trust them, and you say, oh, this is what I'm struggling with, I want to get it done, they might be nice to you and say, oh, they might just be encouraging to you. But if that's not going to help you, let them know that. Let them know what's going to be helpful for you to stay on task. There's different creative ways I've seen people do this, both in person and remotely. So I don't have time to go into those things, but ask me later if you're curious.
I also dropped a link in the chat. We did have a past webinar for busy lawyers specifically about procrastination and overwhelm, and it offered 5 steps to bust through those. Okay, so another question from someone who suffers with ADHD. A significant part of their disorder is being very impulsive. What skills can we use to control impulsivity?
That's good. So impulsivity can sort of express itself in different ways. One, it can be, chasing an interest. Like, oh, I had this thought, this interest, and I'm going with it. It can express itself in conversation. So like, I have this thought, I need to express it. I need to interrupt this person who's talking just to get it out, because it feels like if I don't, I'm going to explode. So with impulsivity, one, start with that awareness. Like, when am I feeling it? Not just at the peak of impulsivity, like when that urge is there, but start practicing recognizing when it starts, right? So oftentimes I've heard the analogy of a wave, right? So like when the wave starts to increase and crest, right? Like that's the feeling of impulsivity. Being aware of when it's increasing, right? You'll feel a little more in control, just knowing like it's happening, as opposed to suddenly being, at the peak of that wave and feeling like, oh, I need to do this. I can't. It's no longer a choice. I'm sort of driven by this impulse. So if you can notice it going up, and also remind yourself that impulse is not going to stay, right? It's not a constant state. So if you practice on something small and insignificant. Like I have this impulse to say something, or I have this impulse to eat something or do something that's like, it's not that big of a deal. I can practice just waiting it out, right? Like just basically like holding my breath to see how long does this feeling last, and when can I notice it start to diminish? And just practicing that one, again, starting with the awareness, and then practicing waiting it out as an exercise for yourself in control. Like the impulse is there, but I want to try to beat the impulse. You can make it a game, right? Like I'm going to see how long I can wait until, either I do what this impulse is driving me to do. And then the more that you practice that, the longer and longer you'll be able to wait it out, to the point where the impulse can come, peak, and then diminish. And then you realize, I didn't have to respond to the impulse, right? Once you feel like you have a choice to respond or not, you're going to feel more in control. You're still going to feel that impulse. And sometimes you're going to respond to the impulse. But it's always nicer when it feels like it's your choice to do that versus you're compelled to do it. So, and you could apply that to different areas of how your impulse or that impulse to do something in the different domains that it might show up.
Excellent. One more question at the moment, which is how do you identify things, for example, song, place, etc., that is motivating to use to increase attention on a task?
So what I would recommend is start with your senses, right? So a taste, a smell, a sound, right? That when you hear it, taste it, smell it, touch it, like it elicits a positive response. And maybe even like just keeping notes in those different categories. Like, these are scents or tastes that I like, or sounds or textures. And then try to pair those with things that are traditionally boring or challenging to focus on. And just like test it out to see, like, is this natural response effective enough to help me focus? Because if that natural dopamine boost translates, that will actually help me focus, right? When we have more dopamine in our brains, we're able to stay more focused. Whether it, can't remember the beginning of the question, if it was the assessing your environment as well. Sometimes you're going to have to sort of play around with options, right? So if you only have one option to work in, like I work in an office, and I don't design that office, or I work at home because I have a remote job, you might have limited control over what that environment looks like. So just be thinking about, what do I have control over in that environment, right? You might not exercise that control, but just being aware of what those options are for you is a good starting point. And then trying to tweak those things ever so slightly to see, does that help or hinder my goal of focusing? So for example, like in an office setting, one of the things that comes up a lot is distractions. If you're working with other people in an office, right? Like interruptions, right? And what do you have control over? Like, if you're in an office with a door, do you have control over shutting that door, right? Putting a sign saying, do not disturb for this amount of time. If you don't have an office door to close, if you're in an open setting with cubicles, right? What do you have control over in that setting? So you don't have a door, maybe you have control over, having a sign on your cubicle saying, do not disturb, I'm trying to focus. Is there something that you have control over? Again, like headphones, like trying to cancel out noise, or turning off reminders so you don't get distractions on your computer. Little things like that sometimes can be a good place to start, but also you might realize that when you change something in your control, you might suddenly realize the effect of that distraction, when before you might have thought, oh, that was not a big deal, right? That's like wallpaper. It's like, yeah, it's just there. But as soon as you turn it or change it, suddenly it's like, oh, that's significant. So reminders on a phone is one of those things where just talking to someone recently, she said, like, all of a sudden, and I've had this happen too, when all of a sudden I don't get reminders on my phone that I used to do. And I didn't make any setting changes, but all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm not getting my email reminders. One, it's nice not to be distracted, but like that draws my awareness to the fact of how distracting it is to get constant email reminders. Like, oh yeah, one, I survived, I didn't need them. And two, if I choose to turn them off, like maybe that's a way that I can focus and avoid or fight procrastination.
Thank you. There's one more question that I can answer, which is, what is the difference between LCL and Maslow's, which is nothing. So LCL has two main practice areas currently, or service areas, which is the mental health and well-being clinical services and the practice management services, which when originally created were branded separately as Maslow's. We are doing away with that branding, that separate branding for Maslow's. So you will see it less and less, even to the point of the Maslow's website redirecting to new places on the lclma.org primary website. Slow process, but happening. It's caused a lot of confusion. That question exactly. So thank you for your patience with it, and hopefully it will be much clearer in the future and the soon future. And hopefully that's a sufficient answer, but feel free to ask follow-up questions on that or any other questions. I don't see any other questions currently in the Q&A, which is the only place that is functioning for the purposes of attendee participation. So we've got another. Okay. So do we have any suggestions for making another family member comfortable with the idea of working from home?
So the way I understand that question is, you're the one working from home and you want to make another family member comfortable with you working from home. I guess the opposite could be true as well. So yeah, one, I would start off with talking to that family member about what to expect, like, and what is needed, right? So I'm working from home, as you can probably tell from my background that's blurred, but I have small kids who are often running above me. And so having a clear avenue of communication with family members about what do you need to work from home, right? What distractions might be avoidable, or what can you try in terms of routines that are going to help you work well in a remote setting. And then vice versa, like, what do your family members need, right? If your family member is also working remotely, what do they need, and how can you adjust to sort of try to make that working environment optimal for all involved to the best of your ability. The challenges come when what's optimal for you is not optimal for your family member, right? So if you need peace and quiet, but your family member works really well with like ambient noise and like they need to be in the mix of things, that can be challenging. So, and again, sometimes it's figuring out what options you have available for you individually, or that for your family member individually. So if you need quiet, but your family member needs ambient noise, like, how can you induce quiet for yourself? Maybe that's in your environment, maybe that's headphones. Same for your family member. If they need noise, is that in the environment or is that in headphones? There's lots of other things that can be helpful in sort of navigating how working from home can work when you're not alone. But my first thought is always, well, it depends, right? Depends on your situation, depends on your family member. Yeah, if one thing I will say, I know that we're going long, but one of the things about working remotely is it's really helpful to have some sense of your work space and time and your non-work space and time. So having some good boundaries around when you start and when you end work is really important. Also having some physical boundaries of where you do your work and where you do your non-work, right? Even if you, let's say you live and work in a one-room apartment, having a corner where you do your work, and then you leave that corner when you're done with work, right? Having some physical change, so to mark that you're done with work. That boundary is really important. And I've often told people, even if you don't have to, sometimes changing out of your work clothes into non-work clothes can be a good cue to our brains that I'm done with work and now I'm shifting to something else. That's really helpful to have those separations for ourselves and for our family members as well.
All right, we do have another question if you have time, Sean, which is, would you recommend therapy for someone who suffers from ADHD and wants to improve focus, or would you just recommend reading books about ADHD and becoming more aware of the disorder?
That's a good question. So books can be really helpful. There are a lot of good books on ADHD. They can give you insights and suggestions and plans for sort of how to do things differently or techniques to try. It's one thing to have the information. It's another thing to implement the information. So if you are someone who reads a book, benefits from that information, and then implements it, well, then maybe that's adequate. You don't need to get an additional level of support. For many people, it's like, I know it in my head, but it's hard to implement it because there's lots of challenges to implementing changes. So therapy can be really helpful in exploring those barriers. Like, why is it hard for me to implement this change when I know I would benefit from it, right? So a good therapist can help identify those barriers, can help with accountability, right? So when you're making a plan with a therapist and you know you're going to see that therapist in a week or two, sometimes that can be helpful in implementing something that's difficult because you know you're going to talk about it again. So a therapist, from my perspective, it's not either or, like therapy or books. It's really about like what is needed, and this would require an honest look, internal look, about like what is needed for me to benefit. Is it just information? Is it accountability? Is it unpacking some things that a therapist can help unpack, such as, other issues? It's not just that I'm having trouble focusing, but when I have trouble focusing, then I start to feel self-conscious or anxious, right? Or then I start to beat myself up because I have these shoulds that I should be able to do it, but I can't. So now I'm beating myself up. So like now I have a different layer of something that I need to address. So books aren't necessarily going to be helpful to unpack all that stuff or actually go through that process with you. And that's when the therapist can be really helpful in providing that.
Great questions and great answers. It's the last of the questions that have been asked so far. I'll give it just another minute while I go back to the top for a few questions that I answered during the presentation, which was one, how can one join this ADHD support group? So the link is in both the chat, and I assume it is publicly visible where it's answered in the Q&A too, but it's also at the top of the chat. And then another question was whether the attendees will get a copy of the slides, and we will make those available along with the link to the recording, which will be sent to everyone who is registered and also available ongoing on our website after that. So no further questions at the moment. So thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone who is here and who will watch on demand. Fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Sean.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you all for tuning in.
All right, wishing you all a great day. Thank you.